Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to see each of you here tonight. I know that a lot of people are making Christmas plans or traveling the family, but we're glad that you're here tonight, and we hope that you've had a wonderful, wonderful week. Before we go to the Lord in prayer, just want to share with you a couple of prayer requests. First is if you had received my email, I kind of updated everyone where Brother Don's status. And Brother Don's just not doing great. And so he's very weak. Looks like his kidneys are shutting down, and they're going to need to do some dialysis. And he just needs a lot of care right now. And so please continue to remember him in prayer and the entire family. I had a good conversation with Brother Tim yesterday, and he also kind of updated me on his mom, who Sister Imogene is really to the point where um, she's unable really to feed herself, and she's in bed a lot and sleeps a lot, and that's just about the progression of her dementia. Alzheimer's has taken her at this point. So we just need to remember the entire Hoover family, uh, specifically during these holiday seasons and Christmas season. I know they would appreciate the prayer. A couple of other prayer requests. Just keep my son Jacob and his friend Scott in prayer. They were in a pretty serious car accident yesterday on 99. Fortunately, they were able to walk away, but the car's totaled, and they're just bruised up, sore this morning. But the most important thing is that they're okay. And but they were pretty shaken up about it. And when you get that phone call as a dad, and the first words out of his mouth, "Dad, I'm okay," you know, but my son was on the side of the road without shoes on because he left them in the car, and they wouldn't let him go back to the car to get his shoes, so he was cold. But I'm just glad that he's okay. Also, I'd ask that you would remember a fellow pastor that I've gotten to know um, over the last, I don't know, probably 5, 6 years. His name's Brother Jeff Llewellyn. He pastors a church in Minden, Louisiana, and he's about, I would probably venture to say he's probably in his mid-60s. Would you say mid-60s, honey? And Brother Jeff is one of the most kindest men, gentlest men you could ever meet. And he has COVID, and he's in ICU, and they had to put him on a ventilator. And so his son, Nathan, has been updating us daily on it through Facebook, and it's just, he shows improvement and not improvement. And just ask that you would remember Brother Jeff in prayer and his family. And, of course, the church there, I think it's Calvary, if I remember correctly. Oh, no, Hyde Park Baptist Church. And so please remember those fine people there. He's just good. He's come to our state meeting a few times, and just a good man. So please remember them in prayer. Any other prayer requests before we go to the Lord in prayer? We're all good. It was great having Brother Eldon back with us, and they got a chance to visit with their granddaughter. It's in the military, and so that's always good. But Brother Eldon, would you lead our hearts in prayer to start us off with tonight? Amen. Brother Paul, Sister April.
Good evening. It's good to see everyone here tonight. Small group. Ask you to sing out with us tonight. There's gonna be, I think we have 8 songs tonight, but don't, just a verse of each song. So don't worry. So I would have panicked. So, but anyway, we're gonna start off. First one is "Wish You a Merry Christmas." Wish you a Merry hometown of Bethlehem. The little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. Above thy deep and dreamless sleep, the silent stars go by. Yet in the dark street shineth the everlasting light. The hopes and fears of all who fear shall live with peace tonight. What child is this? What child is this who laid to rest on Mary's lap is sleeping, whom angels greet with anthems sweet, while shepherds watch are keeping. This is Christ the King, whom shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him now, the babe, the Son of Mary. The first Noel. First Noel, the angels did sing, was a birthday for shepherds in fields where they lay, in fields where they lay keeping their sheep on a cold winter's night, when buds so bleak. Noel, 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 born is the King of Israel. We three kings. We three kings of Orient are, bearing gifts, sweet travels afar. Fields and mountain lore and mountain falling yonder star. Oh, star of wonder, star of night, star of royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us through our perfect life. Oh, come all ye faithful. Oh, come all ye faithful, joyful and triumphant. Oh, come ye to Bethlehem. Come and behold him, born the Silent Night. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. Brother Todd.
It dawned on me as we were singing those songs. Normally we start talking about, we say 2,000 years ago, Jesus was born, and really, technically, 2,000 years ago, he was a young adult. He was in his early 20s, thereabout, and so it's interesting to think. Pretty soon we'll be approaching the time we can actually say 2,000 years. Not only have we passed to see his birth and his life and ministry, but in about 2,000 years, within 10 years, we can actually say it's been 2,000 years since his crucifixion. Time surely has gone by. Tonight we're going to be in the book of Galatians again for our Bible study, Galatians chapter 2. And we're going to be in supposed to be chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. I always have one little hiccup. But we're going to be talking about in defense of the gospel. Now, you might think, well, Brother Todd, I really want to hear a good Christmas, message right before, we celebrate, tomorrow's Christmas Eve and then Christmas Day. And, well, I think the gospel includes the birth of Jesus Christ, does it not? That he was virgin born. And the Apostle Paul was really, when we begin to see the book of Galatians, defending the entirety of the gospel, even that which includes the birth, the death, the resurrection, but most importantly, what he was trying to preserve, the truth of the gospel, is that we can be saved by faith plus nothing else, right? We are saved by God's grace through faith and that of nothing else. And so in Galatians chapter 2, we're going to look at verse 1 through 10. And I really appreciate Sister Jessica passing out those handouts. I forgot to make mention of those. And it's just a very basic handout. If you want to fill in the blank, write some notes. I didn't go into great detail as I went last week. But in Galatians chapter 2, beginning of verse 1, the Apostle Paul writes, "Then 14 years after I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas and took Titus with me also, and I went up by revelation and communicated unto them the gospel which I preached among the Gentiles, but privately to them which were of reputation, lest by any means I should run or had run in vain. But neither Titus, who was with me, being Greek, was compelled to be circumcised, and that because of false brethren unawares brought in, who came in privily to spy out our liberty which we have in Christ Jesus, that they might bring us into bondage. To whom we have give place by subjection, no, not for an hour, that the truth of the gospel might continue with you. But of those who seem to be somewhat, whatsoever they were, maketh no matter to me. God accepteth no man's person. For they who seemed to be somewhat in conference added nothing to me. But contrariwise, when they saw that the gospel of the uncircumcision was committed unto me, as the gospel of the circumcision was unto Peter, for he that wrought effectually in Peter to the apostleship of the circumcision, the same was mighty in me toward the Gentiles. And when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived that the grace was given unto me, they gave to me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, that we should go unto the heathen, and they unto the circumcision. Only that that we should remember the poor, the same which also we were forward to do. And so the Apostle Paul in these verses really gives the Galatian churches as he began to explain in verse 1, that the gospel, its origin was divine. Chapter 2 transitions more into the thought of questioning Paul's authority of preaching the gospel, and Paul details this meeting with Jerusalem church leaders. And so when we begin to look at the first point of verses 1 and 2, we begin to see that Paul makes and talks about the consultation with Jerusalem church leaders. Again, looking at verse 1, he refers to that after 14 years he went again to Jerusalem. Well, what 14 years is he referring to? Well, if you go back into chapter 1, he had talked about his meeting with Peter and the Lord's brother in Galatians chapter 1, verses 18 through 19. It's 14 years after this, but this was not his, like, the second time into Jerusalem. We began to follow the life of the Apostle Paul, and we began to see that he had made several trips to Jerusalem. For example, we see in Acts chapter 9, verses 23 through 29, while he was preaching in Damascus, that his life was threatened, as we often see in the book of Acts, and he departed from there and went to Jerusalem. We also see in Acts chapter 11 that Paul was accompanied by Barnabas to present, and this is after, that they've already been laboring together in the book of Acts, but him and Barnabas were presenting really a humanitarian offering to the membership of the church of Jerusalem because Agabus, a prophet, prophesied of a great famine. And so they went down and they went and provided some relief effort in Jerusalem. And then we see in Acts 15 a Jerusalem council, of a meeting of leaders, the Apostle Paul and Barnabas, over this very similar issue. I think if you look at Acts chapter 15, you have to take a look at Galatians chapter 2 and put it together to help us get a better picture of what was going on. And so what we begin to see in Paul's detail of this Jerusalem council meeting is that we see that he met with a group of people. In fact, if we look at who accompanied Paul, we begin to see that two particular men, Paul pointed out, was that of Barnabas and Titus. Now, many of us already know who Barnabas is. He is the son of encouragement. He is one that we see him time and time again throughout Scriptures. He's the one that mentored Paul. He's the one that sought for Paul to bring him to church at Antioch, and they labored together. We see Barnabas wanting to pour himself into John Mark, whom Paul really was he didn't want to take him on another missionary journey because he quit the first time. But Barnabas, being the encourager that he is and wanted to pour himself into John Mark, that's what he did. This is what Barnabas is known at. He was full of wisdom. He was full of the Holy Spirit. We see a great relationship with the brethren in the church of Jerusalem. In fact, it was the church of Jerusalem that sent Barnabas to the church at Antioch. So they had great faith in them. Well, Barnabas and Paul then are now going to venture down because they've been preaching. They've been on their missionary journeys. They've been preaching the gospel, and they're going to go down to Jerusalem in hopes not to get a pat on the back, not to get some sense of authorization, not any sense of permission to do this. He's coming that they may stand and clarify, this is the message we're preaching. This is what we're handed. This is the divine message, and that it would not be that the Jerusalem church, who seemed to be very influential, may say that is correct. They knew it was correct, but that there would be some sense of unity among the churches and the message that they were indeed preaching, because there was some that was going out preaching a gospel that included faith and works, faith and circumcision. There was Judaizers who are so-called, look at them, they're false brethren they're referred to here, who are going in and said, no, you have to show faith and you have to be circumcised. You need to become a Jew to be genuinely saved. We know that is not true at all. And then there was Titus. Titus is not mentioned in the book of Acts, an account, but we see him mentioned throughout the epistle. In fact, there's a letter penned to him by Paul. And Titus, he accompanied. Titus is very much like Timothy. Titus is referred to. Paul wrote to him that he was a son to him, son in the ministry. And so Titus was given great confidence even to go to Corinth and Ephesus to minister on Paul's behalf. I know Ephesus, maybe not Corinth, but to go to different churches on Paul's behalf to help further their faith. But Titus was along, and Titus is Greek. He's a Gentile. He's not Jew, but he went along, and we'll look at him a little bit more in just a minute. So that's who accompanied Paul. But then there was those at the Jerusalem church. It seemed that what Paul referred to as those of reputation. We're not given names specifically right off the bat, but those of reputation, those who seem to be the most influential at the church at Jerusalem. So that would include the apostles, more likely, if they haven't already, some of the other apostles gone out. James, the Lord's brother. By Acts 15, we already see that the apostle James was already was killed by martyrdom. And so we have James, the Lord's brother, of course, Peter and John, and some other influential men within the church. And he met with them privately. He didn't come in and call a great big council. He wanted to meet with a small group of people because he knew that there was some who was trying to destroy the authenticity of the gospel which Paul preached. They were questioning him. They were trying to add to the gospel. And he met with these people because they were very influential. They were influential in the churches that were being established and the Jews that were going out, that they had, if you will, they had some influence in the ministry and the advancement of the kingdom of God. And Paul wanted to prevent the gospel of being warped and twisted and, in essence, destroying the work in which Paul had accomplished. That's why he said in verse 2, he says, lest by any means I should run or had run in vain. He wanted to meet with them. That way his ministry wouldn't be fruitless. It wouldn't amount to any, it meant something. And so he communicated them then privately the very gospel in which he preached. This means if you have a smaller group of eventual men, more than likely you're going to have less, of those false brethren coming in. You're going to have less argumentation. Because, let's face it, if you've all been in meetings, right, and the more of the crowd, the more of the dissent, the more division, right? You meet with a smaller group, at least you can get some consensus. And that's what Paul's main thrust here is going into Jerusalem, is to consult with the Jerusalem church, specifically their leaders, on this particular issue. But I want you to understand, and I want you to note something here that Paul had said, because the motivation behind the meeting. He said in verse 2 that I went up by revelation. I went up by revelation. In other words, the Jerusalem church did not summon Paul to come up and meet with them. Right? We have to remember that the Jerusalem church is not greater than or a mother church in the hands of authority over all other churches that were being established. Jerusalem church was just as equal as the Antioch church. Jerusalem church was just as equal as all the churches in Galatia. Right? There's no hierarchy. So God had given Paul revelation that he must be going to the Jerusalem church. It was a divine revelation that he would share among them because of their influence, that he would reveal the gospel in which he preached to the Gentiles. You see, what was at stake here was the gospel itself. Is it faith? Is it works? It cannot be both. Which is it? And Paul preached a salvation. He preached a gospel of grace apart from works that is received by faith. And that's the motivation of the meeting. God had called him to go up and have this meeting with the church at Jerusalem. But what we do see is not only during their time of consultation, we see that there was a confrontation with false brethren. We see in verse 3, though, we're given Titus again, more information concerning Titus. It says, but neither Titus, who is with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. Here it seems that Titus was the test subject. He was Exhibit A. He was showing to the apostles here is Titus, here is a Greek. He is saved. Whatever Titus may have demonstrated before the people, his character, his wisdom, his being filled with the Spirit, maybe impartation of a spiritual gift, whatever it was, but they did not compel Titus to become a Jew and receive circumcision. There was no need. Now, some at this point may debate and look and say, well, why did Timothy have to be circumcised? And the answer is this. The reason Timothy had to be circumcised, his father was Greek, his mother was Jewish. So he was of Jewish blood. And it wasn't that Timothy had to be circumcised for any sense of salvation. Timothy was circumcised that it would not hinder the gospel going forward. He was identifying with his Jewish heritage. It opened the door for Timothy to be accepted among his Jewish brethren. It was to his advantage of sharing the gospel. It wouldn't be any advantage for Titus. He is not of Jewish descent. And circumcision had nothing to do with salvation. It was a cultural identification for the Jewish people that they were God's people. So Titus was that test subject. But then notice, and he says in verse 4, he says, and that because of false brethren unawares were brought in. False brethren. Are there false teachers, false brethren, pretenders of the faith? Absolutely. And he says that they came in unawares. In other words, it almost was like they came in unnoticed. They came in disguised. They are wolves in sheep's clothing, I believe is some of the things that are described about these false teachers and false brethren. And so they came in unawares, and for this purpose, to spy out, to examine, to carefully look at the freedom which those believers have in Christ, try to rob them of that freedom and enslave them to the law, to enslave them back into bondage. That's exactly what they wanted to do. Haven't we seen in the book of Acts, when we look at Paul's missionary journeys, how many Jewish brethren followed him city to city, causing uproar, causing disturbances? I mean, it is unbelievable. Not only did he have Jewish brethren doing this, in the sense of they rejected the gospel entirety, but he had people who began to enter in, disguised as Christians, disguised as believers, trying to undermine the very gospel in which he preached to the Gentiles. And so they came in so that they would rob him. But I love Paul's reaction to it all, specifically in this council. I love his words when he says in verse 5, he says, to whom we gave place by subjection, no, not for an hour, that the truth of the gospel might continue with you. In other words, he did not place himself under their authority. He did not recognize, if you will, their teaching. Not for a moment, nothing, because Paul wanted to preserve the gospel for the Gentiles. They did not need to become Jews in order to be saved. Nowhere does it ever say that in Scriptures. Not one bit. And so there was this controversy. And then finally we see that when Paul moved from the controversy, and as they had discussed, as he was not moved by he wasn't going to cave in to the desires of the false brethren. He wasn't there to please them. He was there to please God. He was there to preach the truth, stand upon the truth, and not depart from it. He was trying to preserve the purity of the gospel, that it might not be corrupted. And we began to see that there was a sense of confirmation by the Jerusalem church leaders. Verse 6, Paul says, but of these who seem to be of somewhat, whatsoever they were, maketh no matter to me. God accepteth no man's person. For they who seemed to be somewhat in conference added nothing to me. I love this wording he chooses here. Have you ever been in awe of maybe someone that appeared or seemed to be more authoritative in the field? There's a sense of, recognition when you meet people, like someone wrote a book. You kind of have, they authored a book. You have a sense of, adoration, a sense of, inferiority because someone wrote a book, of a field maybe that you're in or you're looking at, or, you just see, people around, like, for example, if I met, some people in, like, if I ever met our president, any president, past or future, I do have great respect for the office of the presidency, but I realize that whoever fills that office, that they're just a man just like I am. A CEO of a corporation who might seem to be more superior, maybe he's more intellectual, smarter, and so many, if I ever, who is the owner of Tesla? Elon Musk. If I ever met Elon Musk, I would love to sit down and have a conversation with him, because I really think I begin to understand him more when you see his designs, that he was an 80s child. He watched the old school Battlestar Galactica. I know it. And the old Star, I'm pretty sure that we could have a great conversation. I don't know anything much about him beyond that. But if I ever sat down, he is just a person just like I am. There's no difference. And that's what Paul's point is here. Like, whoever these people may be, these leaders, these apostles. I mean, we look at these giants in the scriptures, right? Peter, we look at even Paul himself, or we look at James and John. But do you realize that they are just people like you and I? And it's so easy to put people on a pedestal. Paul didn't do that. He goes, whoever they were, God's no respecter of persons. That people put on their pants the same way as everybody else does. Or in this case, Paul says, everybody puts on their tunic the same way everyone else does, right? It's the same. Whoever they may be, what Paul was referring to here is that he did not feel inferior nor subordinate to them. He really felt that he was on equal standing. And then they kind of gave him, if you will, or they consensus together, recognized the ministry in which Paul was doing in comparison to that of Peter. If you look at verse 7, it says, but contrariwise, when they saw that the gospel of uncircumcision was committed unto me, as the gospel of circumcision was unto Peter, for he that wrought effectually in Peter to the apostleship of the circumcision, the same was mighty in me toward the Gentiles. I want you to notice here that there seems to be, just by reading it, it looks like there's two different gospels. One particularly for the Gentiles and one particularly for the Jews. But there's only one gospel. It's just a phrasing to refer to the same gospel going to two people groups, right? Because there is such a clash between Jews and Gentiles. And so it's the same gospel. There's not two separate gospels. But what they recognized, what they saw, is that they saw that Paul was committed and called and given divine authority to go to the uncircumcised people to present the gospel of Jesus Christ. Just as Peter was called and gave divine authority in his apostleship to go to the circumcision. Now, even though we see that both Paul and Peter's ministries took them to these two parallels, it didn't mean that Paul did not try to preach the gospel to Jewish people, because guess where he went to every village? He went to the synagogues. And we also see where Peter also went to the house of Cornelius, a Gentile centurion, right? So it's not like their ministries didn't, he's a Jew, I can't go to him, or he's a Gentile, I can't go to him. That's not it at all. But their two fields of labor, basically, as Peter remained primarily around Jerusalem, Judea area. Eventually he'll go to Rome. But Paul was to the Gentile world. That was what God wanted him to do. The Jerusalem church recognized that these were the ministries in which God had authorized. It wasn't in the Jerusalem church authorization. It was God's divine authorization of Paul to go into this. In fact, so much so that we see that both apostles were both empowered to the perspective of their ministry fields. Just as Peter was, so was Paul. They recognized it. They saw that. They couldn't deny it one bit. That's what they concluded at this council. And so there came to be an agreement among the church leaders. He mentions here in verse 9, and when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, and they should be, right? They were the beginning, who seemed to be pillars, perceived that the grace that was given unto me, they gave to me and Barnabas the right hands of fellowship, that we should go to the heathen, and they unto the circumcision. Only they would that we should remember the poor, the same which also I was forward to do. So what had happened here is that there was some sense of consensus that, Peter, James, and John, the pillars in the church, extended. They saw the authority that God had given Paul and Barnabas. They recognized it, and they gave to them the right hand of fellowship. What does this mean? It wasn't giving them authority. Their authority was given by God through the Antioch church. It was the Antioch church that had sent them on their way. They didn't need authorization from Jerusalem. They had divine authorization. We see that the sense of giving the right hand of fellowship is kind of the meaning that they gave them encouragement, and it was not apostolic permission as much as we are coming alongside you, encouragement, and recognize you and partnering with you, if you will, in your cause. We in a sense, verbally, by hand, we recognize what God is doing in and through you, and we agree. Is basically is what they did here. And the only thing that they left, according to here, of course, we know that there were some more things in Acts chapter 15, but particularly which Paul mentioned here, was that they might remember the poor, and which Paul was actually, he was willing to do. In fact, it was Paul who went and collected funds, him and his cohorts, and brought it back to Jerusalem. That Paul was a blessing to the Jerusalem church in that regards. And so where does that leave us after Paul says all of this? What it gives the Galatian churches is that they can recount and they can go and investigate that the facts in which Paul presents here are indeed true and give credence to the very gospel which he preaches, so that they should not question the gospel in which he preached. And they should remember that gospel that he preached, that they would not abandon it, because it's the same gospel that he preached is the same gospel that was preached in Jerusalem. The gospel that talks about the birth, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ. It is a gospel that tells people that God is extending his grace towards you and undeserving people, and you can receive salvation simply by faith. Faith. Nothing to it. You can't work for it. Right? You can't work for it at all. Circumcision isn't going to save you. Church membership isn't going to save you. Baptism's not going to save you. Giving your tithes not going to save you. It can't maintain your salvation. Not one bit. And so basically what we do after salvation, to be baptized, to be a member of a church, to give an offering, to serve God in a variety of ways, is our expression of our love and obedience to God who gave himself for us. It adds nothing more to our salvation. We're as saved as we're ever going to be. Isn't that wonderful? And we can't lose it. But yet there are people who will preach a gospel that has a sense of that you have to have some sense of maintaining. You have to add something to it so you won't lose it, or you have to identify with a certain group. Look, you guys might not know this, but I'm pretty sure that there's some people who identify with the Catholic faith that are saved. And I'm pretty sure that there's some people that may identify with some other religion that has accepted Jesus just as you have. And if that's true, if they accepted Jesus, then that's all the salvation they're going to get. Now, they might be confused on some other Bible teaching. But they can be saved. And so we have to, as God's people, we are also responsible for the preservation of the gospel. God has entrusted the gospel to us, the pillar and ground of truth. That's what the church is. And we must preserve the gospel, the purity of it. And we cannot add or take away from what God has presented. We must, as Paul did, be in defense of a glorious gospel. That's what saved us. And it's exciting. All right, so we're going to stop with the lesson there. Did those change? Oh, they didn't change. Oh, it did, okay. I can't believe I put the 1. Anyway. I'm so glad that you joined us tonight. And